She had everything: cars that gleamed like gold, a penthouse above the clouds, a name that opened every door. Then, one stormy night, it all vanished. Her fortune, her friends, her identity, gone in the blink of an eye. Days later, she found herself scrubbing floors in a building she once ruled from the top floor. That's where she met the man everyone else ignored, the janitor society had trained itself not to see. What he said to her in a single quiet moment didn't just change her future, it shattered everything she believed about power, worth, and justice. The night her empire fell, lightning stitched the sky like her own name being crossed out. Servers crashed, phones rang without answers, and by sunrise, Ava was no longer anyone's call to make. The city she once dominated moved on as if she'd never existed. Ava Sinclair had lived a life most people only saw in magazines: tailored suits, private jets, and boardrooms that bent around her every word. To the world, she was the picture of success: young, brilliant, unstoppable. But behind the tinted glass of her luxury car, there was a quiet exhaustion she never spoke of, a kind of blindness that came from never having to look down. She had a driver who never spoke unless spoken to, assistants who laughed on schedule, and meetings that began before she arrived because she was always expected to be everywhere at once. The higher she climbed, the smaller her world became. Her empire rose high above the streets of the city, far from the people who polished its floors or emptied its trash. She never meant to ignore them. In truth, she barely noticed they existed. Every morning she passed through the lobby without a glance at the janitors buffing the marble tiles, faces blurred into the background of her perfectly controlled days. Sometimes she caught her reflection in the lobby glass and mistook it for someone powerful. She didn't realize it was just someone protected from discomfort, from truth, from consequence. That morning was supposed to be like any other, but small tremors had been building for months: investments slipping, a scandal whispering her name, partners growing distant. When it all came crashing down, the fall was swift and merciless. In a single week, Ava went from commanding empires to counting coins. And yet, it wasn't the loss of money that would truly test her. It was what came after. On the other side of the glass walls she had built, someone had been waiting all along. She didn't know it yet, but her story was about to start where she thought life ended. The fall hit Ava like a wave she never saw coming. One moment her name was etched across skyscrapers. The next, it was dragged through tabloids. Betrayed by those she trusted, stripped of everything she built, Ava found herself standing in line at a job center, clutching a paper with her name misspelled. Her designer heels pinched her feet on the worn linoleum. She'd never stood in a queue so long that names became numbers. The fluorescent lights hummed like judgment. Weeks blurred together. Pride turned into quiet survival. The only job she could get was one she never imagined: a cleaning position in an office building she once controlled. Floors she used to stride across in heels now echoed beneath worn shoes and silent humiliation. Her first night on the job, she spilled a bucket. The water raced toward the elevator shaft like her old life disappearing down a drain. No one noticed, no one cared. That's where she met Samuel. Middle-aged, steady, and invisible to most. He had worked those halls for nearly 20 years. His hands were rough, his back tired, but his eyes held a calm Ava couldn't understand. When she dropped her mop one night, he picked it up and said gently, "Don't rush, the floor isn't going anywhere." Samuel sometimes hummed while he worked, soft old tunes that echoed through empty hallways. For Ava, they sounded like freedom wrapped in fatigue. As days passed, Ava began to notice things she had never seen before. The way people spoke over Samuel, the way supervisors avoided his eyes. A manager once muttered about lazy help as he passed. Samuel didn't react. He never did. She wanted to defend him, but the words caught in her throat. Habit made silence her armor. Shame made it heavy. One evening, Ava asked how he endured it. Samuel answered without bitterness, "You get used to being invisible. It's safer that way." Those words followed her home. Then it happened. A new supervisor publicly humiliated Samuel over a minor mistake, his voice loud, cruel, certain of his power. Ava froze. She had once sounded exactly like that. Samuel stood silently, accepting the abuse like something rehearsed over years. The next night, Samuel was gone. His locker stood open. A termination notice was taped inside. His nameplate was still there, crooked, the tape yellowed at the corners. For the first time, Ava realized how easy it was to erase a person without leaving a mark. As Ava stood staring at the empty locker, her chest tightened. She found Samuel outside the building, holding his worn lunchbox. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Samuel looked at her, tired but calm. Then he said something that took only seconds, but split her world open. "People like me don't get fired for mistakes. We get fired for reminding others we're human." That was it. In that instant, Ava saw her entire past clearly. Every time she had looked away, every silence she had chosen because it was easier. The janitor didn't raise his voice. He didn't beg. He simply told the truth. The streetlights flickered against his face, and she saw years of endurance, mistaken for peace. Guilt settled over her like dust you can't wash off. That night, Ava walked into the supervisor's office and spoke. She named the discrimination, the cruelty, the system she herself had once benefited from. She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She told the truth and let it sit heavy in the room. When she walked out, the silence behind her felt like something finally cracking. For the first time in years, silence felt clean, like a storm had passed through every corner of that building. Ava never returned to that job or to her old life. Internal investigations followed. Whispers turned into action. Workers who had spent years looking at the floor finally looked up. A headline appeared a week later, "Company promises fair review." It was small, buried on page 12, but it was a beginning. A week later, Ava met Samuel again. She thanked him. He shook his head. "I didn't change your life," he said. "I just told you what we live with every day." They sat for a while on a park bench, sharing coffee and paper cups. No titles, no power, just two people breathing the same air at last. Ava now works with advocacy groups, using her voice to amplify the ones long ignored. She no longer measures worth in money or power, but in dignity. Samuel's story isn't rare, and that is the real tragedy. Because racism doesn't always shout, sometimes it survives quietly, protected by comfort, by blindness, by silence. And silence, when we have the power to speak, is its strongest ally. Now, when Ava walks past janitors in any building, she meets their eyes. Sometimes they nod, sometimes they don't, but every nod feels like a bridge she's helping to rebuild.